October 15th, 1974. Las Vegas, Nevada. Dean Martin sits alone in his Flamingo Hotel suite, staring at a letter that might as well be his death warrant. The paper trembles in his hands as he reads the same 3 lines over and over. Mr. Martin, you have 48 hours to pay $300,000 or face the consequences. This is your final notice. Chicago management. 20 miles away, John Wayne is having dinner with studio executives, discussing another Western that probably won't matter to anyone. Neither man knows that in 6 hours, Wayne will be sitting across from some of the deadliest men in America, betting his own life on a friendship he's not even sure exists. This is the story of the night the Duke discovered that being a hero sometimes means paying another man's debts, and how Dean Martin learned the difference between drinking buddies and true friends. Dean Martin had always been lucky. Lucky with women, lucky with his voice, lucky with his career. But by October 1974, his luck with gambling had run out in spectacular fashion. It started innocently enough, the way these things always do. Dean loved the action, the rush of big bets and bigger wins. Vegas was his playground, and he was one of its kings. The Rat Pack owned this town, and Dean Martin was royalty. But there's a difference between gambling with house money and gambling with mob money, and Dean had crossed that line without fully understanding the consequences. The trouble began 6 months earlier when Dean was introduced to a high-stakes private game run out of a warehouse on the outskirts of Vegas. The players were serious, not tourists or Hollywood phonies, but men who bet hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single hand of cards. Dean thought he belonged in that game. He was Dean Martin, for crying out loud. He could drink anyone under the table, charm any woman in the room, and hold his own with the best of them. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't entertainment, this was business, and the house always collected its debts. Over 6 months, Dean lost steadily. Not all at once, which might have been merciful, but slowly, like bleeding to death from 1,000 cuts. 20,000 here, 50,000 there. Always with the promise that the next game would be different. The next hand would turn his luck around. By October, Dean owed $300,000 to men who didn't accept IOUs or payment plans. These weren't casino operators bound by gaming regulations. These were Chicago people who viewed unpaid debts as personal insults, requiring permanent correction. The letter had been delivered by 2 men in expensive suits who spoke with polite voices but carried themselves like soldiers. They'd explained the situation clearly. Dean had 48 hours to produce $300,000 in cash, or they would begin collecting the debt through alternative means. What kind of alternative means? Dean had asked, though he already knew the answer. Mr. Martin, one of them had replied, you have a beautiful family. It would be unfortunate if your gambling problem became their problem. Now Dean sat in his hotel suite, surrounded by the trappings of success, but facing the reality of failure. He'd already tried every option he could think of. His agents couldn't access that kind of cash quickly. His business manager had explained that liquidating investments would take weeks. Even Sinatra, who'd helped him out of jams before, was tied up in his own financial complications. There was one more call he could make, to someone who might have both the resources and the willingness to help. But it would mean admitting weakness to a man Dean had always tried to impress with his cool, unflappable image. At 11:30 p.m., Dean Martin picked up the phone and dialed John Wayne's private number. Wayne answered on the second ring. Duke here. Duke, it's Dean. I need help. The serious kind. Wayne's voice immediately sharpened. What kind of trouble? The kind where people die if we don't figure something out in the next 48 hours. Wayne had always respected Dean Martin without fully understanding him. Dean represented everything Wayne wasn't. Smooth where Wayne was rugged, sophisticated where Wayne was direct, effortlessly cool where Wayne was intensely serious. But respect and understanding are different things, and Wayne had spent years watching Dean drift through life on charm and talent without ever seeming to take anything seriously. Now, hearing genuine fear in Dean's voice, Wayne realized there might be more depth to the man than he'd given him credit for. "Tell me everything," Wayne said. For the next 30 minutes, Dean laid out his situation with the kind of brutal honesty he'd never shown anyone. The gambling, the mounting debts, the threats against his family. By the time he finished, Wayne understood that this wasn't about money. It was about survival. "How much?" Wayne asked. $300,000. Cash. By tomorrow night." Wayne was quiet for a long moment, calculating. It was more money than most people made in a lifetime, enough to buy a mansion or fund an entire movie. But it was also the price of keeping a friend alive. "Where do I need to bring it?" Dean was stunned. No questions about paying it back, no lectures about responsibility, no conditions. Just a simple offer to risk everything for someone who'd never done anything to earn it. "Duke, you can't. These aren't movie bad guys. These are killers." "Then we'd better make sure we get this right the first time." Wayne spent the next 18 hours liquidating assets he'd spent a lifetime accumulating. Stocks, bonds, real estate investments. Everything turned into cash as quickly as possible. By sunset on October 16th, he had $300,000 in unmarked bills sitting in a briefcase in his hotel room. The meeting was set for midnight at a warehouse on the industrial side of Las Vegas, the kind of place where business got conducted away from surveillance cameras and witnesses. Wayne insisted on handling the exchange personally, despite Dean's protests. "This is my debt, Duke. I should be the one taking the risk." "No," Wayne said firmly. "You got yourself into this mess because you don't think clearly under pressure. I'm getting you out of it because I do." At 11:45 p.m., Wayne walked into that warehouse carrying a briefcase full of money and a .45 revolver he hoped he wouldn't need to use. The space was dimly lit, filled with shadows and the kind of silence that comes before violence. 3 men waited for him. The one in the center was small and neat, with the kind of face you forgot immediately after seeing it. The 2 flanking him were large and looked like they'd killed people with their hands. "Mr. Wayne," the small man said, "we weren't expecting you. Where is Mr. Martin?" "Mr. Martin sent me to handle his business. This is highly irregular. We prefer to collect our debts personally." Wayne set the briefcase on a table between them and opened it, revealing neat stacks of $100 bills. $300,000. Cash. Dean Martin's debt. Paid in full. The small man looked at the money, then back at Wayne. "Mr. Wayne, you understand this isn't your debt. Why would you pay another man's gambling losses?" Wayne's answer was simple and honest. "Because that's what friends do." "Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever put everything on the line for someone who couldn't help themselves?" Drop your thoughts in the comments. The small man counted the money carefully, while his associates watched Wayne for any sign of deception or weakness. Finding neither, he closed the briefcase and nodded. "Dean Martin's debt is satisfied. But Mr. Wayne, a word of advice. Keep your friend away from games he can't afford to lose." You don't have to worry about that, Wayne replied. Dean's gambling days are over. Wayne left that warehouse knowing he'd just spent a fortune on someone who might not have done the same for him. But as he drove back toward the lights of Vegas, he felt something he hadn't expected: satisfaction. He'd been John Wayne, the movie star, for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be Marion Morrison, the man who stood up for his friends. Dean was waiting in Wayne's hotel room, pacing like a caged animal. When Wayne walked in, Dean's face showed a mixture of relief, gratitude, and shame that Wayne would remember for the rest of his life. Is it done? It's done. You're square with them. Dean sat down heavily, the weight of stress and fear finally leaving his shoulders. Duke, I don't know how to thank you. $300,000. That's more money than I can ever pay back. Wayne poured himself a drink and studied Dean's face. Then don't try to pay it back. Just make sure you learned something from it. I learned I'm a coward. I learned I'm weak. I learned I'm not half the man I pretended to be. No, Wayne said firmly. You learned you're human. There's a difference. Over the next hour, they talked in a way they'd never talked before. Not as casual acquaintances sharing drinks after a show, but as two men who'd just shared something that changed them both. Why did you do it? Dean asked. Really? Why risk everything for someone like me? Wayne considered the question seriously. Because behind all that smooth talk and fancy clothes, you're a good man who got in over his head, and because everybody deserves at least one person who won't walk away when things get dark. I could have gotten you killed tonight. But you didn't. And now you know what it costs to have real friends instead of drinking buddies. The experience transformed Dean Martin in ways that surprised everyone who knew him. He quit gambling entirely, not gradually, but immediately and permanently. More importantly, he began treating his relationships with the same seriousness Wayne had shown him that night. Dean's marriage to John, which had been strained by his gambling and drinking, strengthened as he focused on being present for his family instead of always looking for the next thrill. His performances became more heartfelt, as if surviving a brush with death had reminded him why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. The friendship between Wayne and Dean deepened into something neither man had expected. They began spending time together away from Hollywood parties and Vegas shows, just two men who discovered they respected each other for reasons that had nothing to do with fame or success. You know what's funny? Dean told Wayne during one of their regular dinners. I spent years trying to impress people who didn't matter, and the one person whose opinion I really wanted, I almost lost because I was too proud to ask for help. Pride's expensive, Wayne replied. Sometimes it costs more than you can afford to pay. When Wayne was diagnosed with stomach cancer in 1978, Dean was one of his most faithful visitors during treatment. The roles had reversed.